The sound of a champagne cork popping is supposed to be a celebration, but in my family's Savannah home, it was just the opening act for my sister Victoria's one-woman show. They praised her latest paintings, calling her the family's rising star, a true artist. And I, her older sister, the one who quietly makes a living appraising actual masterpieces, was just part of the scenery. An unnoticed detail in a portrait that was never about me. The applause for Victoria felt like a sound wave that went right through me, leaving me untouched, unseen. As my family gathered around her, their praise a warm, glowing bubble, I could never seem to penetrate. I felt a familiar chill settle deep in my bones. It was the chill of being a ghost at my own family's table. It reminded me of the summer I was 14. For months, I had worked every weekend at a dusty local bookstore, saving every single dollar in a glass jar I kept hidden under my bed. The label written in my best cursive read Art Fund. Inside was $212, the exact amount I needed for a professional set of watercolor paints I'd seen in a catalog, the kind real artists used. It felt like the key to my future. I remember the day I finally had enough. I was sitting on my bedroom floor, the bills and coins spread out on my rug, counting them for the 10th time just to be sure. My mother, Patricia, appeared in the doorway, her smile bright and practiced. "Clara, honey," she'd said, "Victoria needs your help." Victoria had been cast as the lead in the school play and had decided at the last minute that the set design was drab. She needed money for new fabric, for glitter, for whatever fleeting vision she had for her moment in the spotlight. I remember the weight of my mother's gaze as she looked at my little pile of money. "You're always so good at saving," she'd said, as if it were a character trait, not a necessity. I had tried to protest, but Mom, this is for my paints. I earned it. My father, Stephen, had overheard from the hallway. "Don't be selfish, Clara. This is for your sister's big debut. It's important." Important? Victoria's play was important. My art was a hobby. They took the money, all $212 of it. They didn't ask, not really. They just took it with promises of paying me back that they never kept. Victoria's set was beautiful. She got a standing ovation. A week later, I saw the leftover glitter and fabric tossed in a trash bag in the garage. That night, I had promised myself I would never again depend on them for anything related to my passion. I would build my world in secret, where they couldn't touch it, couldn't take it, couldn't even see it. And now, 13 years later, as the chatter from the dinner table faded into a dull hum in my ears, my mother's voice cut through the noise, pulling me back to the present. "Clara, honey." It was the same tone she'd used all those years ago, the honeyed sound that came right before she was about to take something from me. "Your father and I have been talking, and we have the most wonderful news for Victoria." She paused, waiting for me to engage, to ask the right question. I just looked at her, my face, a carefully blank canvas. "Mr. Abernathy, the collector, has agreed to a private viewing," my father announced, his chest puffed out with pride. "He's coming here to the house to see Victoria's new collection." "That's wonderful," I said, the words tasting like ash. I knew what was coming next. "It is," my mother agreed, her smile tightening, "which is why we need to present her work in the best possible light. The living room is too cluttered, and the gallery is in financial trouble. So we've decided the best place to showcase her art is your room." There it was, the demand disguised as a family decision. "My room?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Yes," she said, her tone becoming brisk, practical. "It has the best natural light in the whole house. We'll move your bed into the guest room for a while, clear everything else out. It will be the perfect, intimate gallery space, a private showroom." I looked from my mother's expectant face to my father's stern one. He hadn't said a word, but his expression was clear. This was not a discussion. I glanced at Victoria, who was examining her nails, pretending not to be a part of this conversation, even though it was all for her. My room wasn't just a room. It was my office. It was the quiet, secret heart of my entire career. It was where I took calls with auction houses in London and private collectors in Tokyo. It was where I analyzed market trends, authenticated artwork worth more than this entire house, and managed an investment portfolio that my family couldn't even begin to comprehend. It was my sanctuary, the one place I had built for myself, hidden in plain sight. And now they wanted to turn it into a stage for Victoria's mediocre paintings. They wanted to erase my world to make space for her fantasy. "The viewing is in 2 weeks," my father said, finally speaking. "So you'll need to have everything cleared out by this weekend. It will give us time to patch the walls and paint." The casual cruelty of it all, the assumption that my life, my space, my work was so insignificant that it could be dismantled in a weekend for Victoria's benefit. They weren't just asking for a room. They were asking me to become invisible completely, to pack up my existence into boxes so that my sisters could be put on display. I looked at them, my family, a tableau of casual entitlement. They had just asked me to dismantle my life to erase myself from the only space in this house that was truly mine, and they had done it with the same nonchalance as asking me to pass the salt. My mind reeled. The work I did in that room, the discreet video calls with clients in Zurich, the hours spent poring over auction catalogs and market data, that work paid for the very wine on this table. It paid for the new tires on my father's car last month. It paid for the emergency vet bill for Victoria's designer dog. They took the support, but they refused to see the source. To them, my life was a vague, unimportant hobby. And in that moment, I could have fought. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the years of receipts and secret successes in their faces. I could have told them that the little freelance thing I did from my bedroom generated more income than my father's struggling gallery had in the last 5 years. But I didn't. Instead, a profound and chilling calm settled over me. It was the calm of a decision made long ago, a promise I had made to myself in the dark, finally coming into the light. "Okay," I said. The word was quiet, barely a whisper, but it landed in the center of the room with the force of a gavel. My mother's tense smile immediately relaxed into one of genuine relief. "Oh, wonderful, honey. I knew you'd understand. It's for the best, you'll see. Victoria's work will look stunning in there." My father gave a curt, satisfied nod, as if I had finally passed some long overdue test of obedience. He picked up his fork and returned to his dinner. The matter settled, his inconvenient older daughter properly put in her place. Victoria didn't even look up from her phone, but I saw the small, triumphant smirk play on her lips. She had won. Again. Of course she had. "I'll start packing things up tomorrow," I added, my voice devoid of any emotion. "I'll need some boxes." "Of course, dear. We'll get you plenty of boxes," my mother chirped, already moving on. "Stephen, we should probably get that scuff on the north wall painted over before the viewing. A nice neutral white, I think. We want the art to be the focus." I excused myself from the table. No one noticed. I walked up the stairs to my room, my office, my sanctuary, and closed the door behind me. The silence was a welcome relief. I stood in the center of the room, looking at the life I had built within these 4 walls. The bookshelves filled with art history, tomes, the discreet filing cabinets holding client records, the high-end computer where I managed portfolios worth millions. And as I stood there, I finally let myself ask the question that I know you're asking right now. Why? Why did I say yes? Why didn't I fight back? To understand, you have to understand the nature of the prison I'd been living in. It's a prison with no bars built from years of quiet dismissals and casual cruelties. It's a cage forged not from steel, but from the invisible weight of family expectation. You learn very early on that your needs are secondary. You learn that making a fuss demanding your share of attention or resources only leads to more pain. It leads to being called dramatic, selfish, ungrateful. So you stop fighting. You learn to make yourself smaller. You learn to be the responsible one, the low-maintenance one. You learn to survive by becoming invisible. That's the invisible chain of the survivor. It's a chain forged link by link every single day. A forgotten birthday here, a dismissed achievement there, a loan you give that's never repaid, a sacrifice you make that's never acknowledged. Each one is a small thing, too small to make a scene about. But over time, those links connect, forming a chain so heavy you forget you're even carrying it. You just know that your shoulders are always tired. You just know that it's easier to comply than to struggle against the weight. Saying yes wasn't a surrender. It was a survival mechanism I had perfected over 27 years. It was the path of least resistance, the way to avoid the lectures, the guilt trips, the disappointed sighs. It was the price I paid for a fragile peace. But tonight, something was different. As I said, that quiet, okay, as I watched the relief wash over their faces, I felt the cold, hard weight of every single link in that chain. For the first time, I wasn't just wearing the chains. I was seeing them. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I was about to break them for good. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk, the moonlight casting long shadows across my keyboard, and I worked. But I wasn't researching art markets or analyzing client portfolios. I was digging. My mother had once called me sentimental for keeping old paperwork. "Why do you hold on to this junk, Clara?" she'd ask, picking up a box of old bank statements and school reports. I just shrugged. I didn't have a good answer then, but I did now. I was looking for proof that the unease I'd felt my entire life wasn't just in my head. Years ago, my father had set up a shared family cloud drive, a digital filing cabinet for important documents, tax returns, insurance policies, copies of birth certificates. He'd given us all the password, then promptly forgot about it. But I hadn't. I was the one who had scanned and uploaded everything, organizing it into neat labeled folders. They never used it. They just assumed I'd handle the boring paperwork. They had no idea they had given me the key to their entire financial history. I started with the gallery. The folder was labeled Gallery Business. Inside it was a mess, but within minutes, I found what I was looking for, the latest bank statements. The numbers were worse than I could have imagined. Overdue notices were flagged in red. A business loan with a staggering balance. I did the math on a small notepad, my hand steady, my mind cold and clear. They were in debt for over $350,000. So their desperation wasn't just about impressing Mr. Abernathy. It was about survival. They were trying to land a major sale from him, not just for Victoria's ego, but to stop the bleeding, to keep the bank from foreclosing on the gallery that was the cornerstone of their social standing. Then I looked for anything related to Victoria's sales. There wasn't much. A few invoices for small commissions from family, friends, most of them marked unpaid. Then I found an email thread between my parents from 3 months ago. The subject line was, "Victoria's Career Investment." "Stephen, we have to keep funding her," my mother had written. "The materials, the studio space, it's an investment in her future." My father's reply was blunt. Patricia, it's been 5 years. She's sold 3 paintings. 3. To your sister. We're not investing. We're hemorrhaging. The gallery can't sustain this. My mother's response was sharp. She just needs one big break. Abernathy could be it. We have to believe in her. They weren't just supporting a dream. They were propping up a fantasy with money they didn't have, all while ignoring the daughter who was actually succeeding. A bitter taste filled my mouth. But the worst was yet to come. Deep in the digital archive, in a folder labeled Estate Docs, I found scans of my grandparents' will. I remembered my grandfather, a kind, quiet man who smelled of sawdust and old books. He was the one who had first given me a sketchbook, who told me I had a curious eye. He and my grandmother had passed away when I was in college. They hadn't left much, just enough to help with our education, or so I was told. I clicked open a document I'd never seen before. It was a formal letter from their estate lawyer establishing a trust and artistic endeavors scholarship fund in my name for $15,000. The money was meant for me, specifically for my education and career in the arts. It was supposed to be transferred to me on my 21st birthday. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had never received that money. I had assumed my share was just a few $1,000s that got absorbed into my general tuition, which my parents had complained about paying. I dug further, and then I found it. A scanned bank statement from an account I didn't recognize. A single transaction dated 1 week after my 21st birthday. A withdrawal of exactly $15,000. The memo line read loan to Pierce Gallery. A loan. They hadn't just ignored the fund. They had taken it. They had stolen my inheritance money, specifically left for my artistic future, by the one person who had truly believed in it. And they had funneled it into their failing gallery, justifying it to themselves as a loan they never intended to repay. And they had certainly never told me. The calm I had felt for the past 24 hours shattered. This wasn't just about favoritism anymore. This wasn't just about being overlooked. This was theft. This was a deep and profound betrayal that cut through years of carefully constructed emotional walls. I thought about the part-time jobs I'd worked through college serving coffee at dawn before class shelving books in the library late at night. I thought about the scholarships I'd fought for the ramen noodle dinners, the constant grinding stress of making ends meet, all while that $15,000 my money was being used to prop up their failing business and Victoria's fantasy career. The hurt was so sharp, so intense, it felt like a physical blow. But underneath the pain, something else was crystallizing. A cold, hard resolve. My plan had been simple at first. Move out. Buy the house across the street. Make them see me. Make them realize what they'd lost. A quiet, personal victory. But this changed everything. This wasn't about teaching them a lesson in respect anymore. This was about justice. They hadn't just been dismissive parents. They were frauds. They were thieves. They had stolen from their own daughter. And I had the receipts for every single transgression. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the dark sleeping houses of my neighborhood. My family was asleep across the street, secure in their little world of lies and self-deception. They thought they were dealing with the same quiet, compliant Clara they had always known. They had no idea they had just armed her for war. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of gray and pink. I hadn't moved from my desk all night. The scanned image of that bank transfer, $15,000, my money was burned into my mind. The grief I'd felt earlier had been replaced by something else, something cold and sharp. It was the clarity that comes after a devastating fire, when the smoke has cleared and you can finally see the true shape of the ruin. My initial plan felt small now, almost childish. Buying a house across the street to make a point, that was the plan of a hurt daughter. But I wasn't just a hurt daughter anymore. I was a victim of fraud. They hadn't just neglected me, they had stolen from me. This was no longer about being seen. This was about holding them accountable. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking at the grand old mansion across the street. The Abernathy house, the neighborhood had called it for generations. It was a local landmark, a 3-story Victorian, with a sprawling porch and a turret that looked like something out of a fairy tale. It was a symbol of old Savannah, of legacy and artistry and genuine class. Everything my family pretended to be, but wasn't. And in that moment, my plan shifted. I wasn't going to buy a house. I was going to buy that house. I wasn't just going to be their neighbor. I was going to become the legacy they could only ever dream of imitating. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady, as I scrolled through my contacts. I bypassed the local real estate agents I'd casually looked at before. This required a different level of expertise. I stopped on a name I'd gotten from a client in Atlanta, a woman known for handling high-value, discreet property deals. Her name was Genevieve Albright. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. Genevieve Albright. Miss Albright, my name is Clara Pierce. I was referred to you by a mutual acquaintance. I have a property I'm interested in acquiring in Savannah. Of course, Miss Pierce. I'd be happy to help. Which property are you looking at? I took a breath. The old Abernathy estate on Jones Street. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her recalibrating. The Abernathy estate wasn't just any house. It was a multi-million-dollar property that had been off the market for years. That's an ambitious acquisition, she said, her tone shifting from polite to intrigued. I wasn't aware it was for sale. I believe the current owners might be motivated by the right offer, I said calmly. I'd like you to approach them with an all-cash offer, well above market value. Speed and discretion are the priorities. An all-cash offer, she repeated slowly. Miss Pierce, for a property of that value, we are talking about a significant sum. May I ask for financial verification? This was the moment the real Clara stepped out from behind the curtain. Of course, I said. My financials are managed through my firm. I'm an independent art consultant and investor. I can have my accountant send over proof of funds this morning. The liquid portion of my investment portfolio is currently valued at just over $5.2 million. Will that be sufficient to begin the conversation? The silence on the other end was longer this time. It was the sound of someone completely reassessing who they were talking to. I was no longer just a young woman interested in a house. I was a serious player. Yes, Miss Pierce, Genevieve, finally said her voice, now carrying a deep and unmistakable note of respect. That will be more than sufficient. I will get in touch with the owner's representatives immediately. With an offer like this, I believe we can move very, very quickly. That's what I'm counting on, I replied. I'll need to put together the formal offer. Could you send me your full legal name and contact information? I gave her the details and she read them back to me. Clara Pierce, and the address you have listed is also on Jones Street, right across from the Abernathy estate. That's correct, I said. I'm a neighbor. I see, she said, and though her tone was professional, I could hear the smile in her voice. She understood. This wasn't just a real estate transaction. This was a chess move. After we hung up, I stood at my window again, looking at that beautiful sleeping giant of a house. For 27 years, my family had defined my worth. They had decided I was less than, not as bright, not as important as my sister. They had written my story, and I had quietly lived within its pages. But with one 10-minute phone call, I had picked up the pen. I was starting a new chapter, one where I wasn't the supporting character in Victoria's story. I was the protagonist of my own. They thought they were evicting their quiet, unremarkable daughter from her little room. They had no idea they were about to be overshadowed by the empire she had built in the silence they had created for her. The first move had been made. Now all I had to do was wait for them to realize they were playing a game they didn't even know had begun. The click of the phone ending the call was the loudest sound in the world. A starting gun, a declaration. For the first time in my life, I felt the solid ground of my own power beneath my feet. To them, I was still the quiet girl upstairs, the one who could be displaced and dismissed. But in the real world, the world that operated on competence and capital, I was a force, and I had just set that force in motion. I spent the next 2 days in a state of suspended animation. I went through the motions of work, answering emails, reviewing auction previews, but my mind was elsewhere. It was across the street in that beautiful sleeping house. It was with Genevieve Albright, my new unseen ally, who was quietly dismantling my family's world without them even knowing it. She was good. Emails arrived at precise intervals updating me on her progress. Initial contact made. Owners are intrigued. Drafting the preliminary offer now. Each message was a small, satisfying tremor beneath the foundations of my old life. On the third day, a longer email arrived. The subject line read confidential. Jones Street acquisition, update, and context. I opened it, my heart beating a little faster. Clara, it began the use of my first name, a sign of our developing rapport. The offer has been presented and very well received. They are extremely motivated sellers. There is, however, some interesting context you should be aware of. I leaned closer to the screen. The current owners, she wrote, are selling because of financial difficulties, though they are trying to keep it quiet. It appears they are pinning their hopes on one final major art sale to salvage their situation. They're holding one final private viewing this weekend for a major collector they believe could be their saving grace, a Mr. James Abernathy. The name didn't just register. It detonated. My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Abernathy, Mr. Abernathy. Not a Mr. Abernathy, the Mr. Abernathy. My Mr. Abernathy. The reclusive billionaire who had been my most important and most secret client for the past 3 years. The man who trusted my eye so implicitly that he'd once purchased a post-war abstract painting for 7 figures based on my 2-word recommendation via an encrypted email. Buy it. The man who I had only ever spoken to through secure channels, whose privacy was so paramount that he had never once asked about my personal life, and I had never offered. He knew me only as CP, the anonymous disembodied expert, whose judgment he valued above all others. And my family, my clueless, arrogant family, was about to present my sister's amateurish derivative paintings to him, to a man whose collection included Rothkos and de Koonings, to a man who could spot a fraud from a mile away, because he paid me a small fortune to do exactly that for him. A slow, incredulous smile spread across my face. This was a level of irony so profound, so perfect. It was almost poetic. They were trying to con my client. They were performing for an audience of one, and that one person's most trusted advisor was the very daughter they had deemed worthless. My plan had been to show them my success. I had envisioned the moment I would reveal the deed to my new house, the numbers in my bank account, the truth of my career. But now I didn't have to show them anything. Mr. Abernathy was going to do it for me. Not intentionally, of course. He would simply walk into that room, look at Victoria's art with his expertly trained eye and deliver his verdict. A verdict that would not just be an artistic critique, but a final devastating judgment on my family's entire life of pretense. I looked at the house across the street again, a new understanding dawning. I wasn't just buying a house anymore. I was buying a front row ticket to the most spectacular and satisfying implosion Savannah's art scene had ever witnessed. This wasn't just a housewarming anymore. It was going to be a masterclass. The day had a strange cinematic quality. The air in Savannah was thick with the scent of jasmine and the promise of a storm. It was D-Day, eviction day. The day I was supposed to pack my life into cardboard boxes and disappear. I stood before the mirror in the small temporary apartment I'd been using for the past week. I wasn't wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I wasn't dressed for moving. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit I'd bought for a meeting in New York last year, a silk blouse, low heels that made a soft, determined click on hardwood floors. My hair was pulled back in a sleek, professional knot. I looked like a woman who chaired board meetings, not one who was about to be kicked out of her childhood bedroom. I was an art expert after all. Today, the art of the reveal was everything. I didn't drive. I walked. The short journey across Jones Street felt monumental. Each step was a farewell to the girl who had lived in the shadows. With every click of my heels on the cobblestones, I was walking further away from her and closer to the woman I had secretly become. The house looked the same, imposing beautiful, a perfect facade. I walked up the familiar steps and used my old key for the last time. They were in the living room waiting. My mother, Patricia, was sipping tea, a copy of an art magazine open on her lap. My father, Stephen, was pacing near the window looking at his watch. Victoria was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, the picture of bored superiority. They all looked up as I entered. I saw their expressions shift in unison, confusion, disapproval. "Clara," my mother set, her voice tight, "what are you wearing? We thought you'd be here to start packing." "I'm not here to pack," I said calmly, walking over to the large bay window that looked out onto the street. The view of my new home was perfect. "Don't be difficult," my father grumbled. "We have a schedule to keep. Victoria needs this room cleared by 5 o'clock. Honestly, Clara Victoria chimed in, not looking up from her phone. "The drama is so unnecessary. Just get your boxes and be done with it. Some of us have important work to do." I turned from the window to face them, a small, unreadable smile on my lips. "There's no need for boxes. The movers have already come and gone." That got Victoria's attention. She finally put her phone down. "What are you talking about? Your room is full of your things." "No, it's not," I said. "I moved everything out last week while you were all at dinner." "You moved out." My mother stood up, placing her teacup on the table with a clatter. "Where did you go? To some tiny apartment downtown. You should have told us, we could have helped." The condescension in her voice was thick. The assumption that I could only afford a tiny apartment. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I answered. I gestured out the window, a slow, deliberate movement of my hand. "Actually," I said, my voice as clear and cool as glass, "I moved over there." 3 sets of eyes followed my finger across the street to the grand 3-story Victorian mansion, the Abernathy estate with its sprawling porch and iconic turret. The silence that followed was a living thing. It was thick with disbelief and a dawning, sputtering confusion. Victoria was the first to break. She let out a sharp, ugly laugh. "Right. You moved into the Abernathy house, and I suppose you're the Queen of England. Are you having some sort of breakdown, Clara?" "I'm not having a breakdown," I said, turning my gaze to my father. "I'm having a closing. I bought the house. The sale was finalized last Wednesday. All cash." My father's face, which had been a mask of irritation, slowly went slack. His mouth opened slightly. You what? I bought the Abernathy house, I repeated, enunciating each word. It's mine now. I've been looking for a place with a bit more room for my home office. Home office, my mother whispered, her face pale. For what? For that little freelance thing you do. And there it was, the dismissal, the final one I would ever have to endure from them. That little freelance thing? I began walking slowly toward the center of the room, feeling their eyes track my every move, is a private art consultancy and investment firm. I manage portfolios for a select group of international clients. I authenticate pieces for major auction houses. I broker private sales. That little freelance thing, as you call it currently, manages an investment portfolio valued at just over $5.2 million. I let the number land. I watched it register on their faces. I saw the shock, the denial, the frantic recalculations happening behind their eyes. That's impossible, my father finally managed, his voice raspy. You work from your bedroom. Yes, I said. It was very convenient. And quiet. It allowed me to build my business without any distractions. I looked pointedly at Victoria, or unnecessary drama. But the money, how? My mother was stammering now, her hand fluttering to her throat. I'm good at what I do, I said simply, and I've been very, very busy for the last 5 years. Too busy to deal with much else, I suppose. I walked over to the antique secretary desk in the corner of the room, the one piece of furniture my grandfather had left me. I ran my hand over the polished wood. Funny thing about money, I said, my voice musing, almost conversational. You can't just wish it into existence. You can't build a career on what you hope your talent is. You have to have the numbers to back it up. I turned back to them. Speaking of which, I happened to be looking over some old family financials the other night. The gallery seems to be carrying quite a bit of debt. $350,000, if I remember correctly. It must be very stressful trying to maintain appearances with that hanging over your heads. My father looked like I had physically struck him. And that loan, I continued, my voice dropping slightly, the $15,000 one you took from my art scholarship fund years ago. You should really think about paying that back, with interest, of course. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the seconds of their shattered reality. Their faces were a gallery of shock horror and a dawning, sickening understanding. They weren't looking at Clara, the quiet, invisible daughter. They were looking at a stranger. A woman of means, a woman of power, a woman who held all their secrets in the palm of her hand. They had wanted me to be invisible, but in that moment, standing in the ruins of their lies, I was the only thing they could see. The doorbell chimed a polite, elegant sound that sliced through the suffocating silence of the room. It was exactly 3:00. Mr. Abernathy was precisely on time. My mother flinched as if the sound had physically struck her. She looked at me, then at my father, her face a mask of panic. For a moment, no one moved. They had been so focused on the implosion of their own world that they had forgotten about the performance they were supposed to stage. Finally, Patricia smoothed her dress and composed herself, the hostess mask sliding back into place, albeit shakily. "That must be him," she whispered, her voice tight. She hurried to the door, pasting on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I remained where I was, a silent observer. My father stood stiffly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Victoria hadn't moved from the sofa, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the empty space where my announcement still hung in the air. "Mr. Abernathy, welcome!" My mother's voice trilled from the foyer. "A little too loud, a little too bright. We're so delighted you could make it." I heard his voice, a low, warm baritone that I knew so well from our secure calls. "The pleasure is all mine, Patricia. Your home is lovely." He stepped into the living room and the entire atmosphere shifted. James Abernathy was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, a tailored linen suit that looked effortlessly expensive, and eyes that missed nothing. He radiated a quiet authority that made my family's posturing look like a child's dress-up game. He shook my father's hand, offered a polite nod to Bradley, and then his eyes swept the room searching. They passed over Victoria on the sofa, and then they found me standing by the secretary desk. His entire face lit up. "C.P.!" he exclaimed, his voice filled with genuine warmth and surprise. "What a wonderful coincidence! I had no idea you'd be here." He strode across the room, bypassing everyone else, and took both of my hands in his. "My dear, it's a delight to see you in person. You're even more poised than you sound on our calls." "It's good to see you too, James," I said, my voice steady. Behind him, I could see my family's collective brain short-circuiting. C.P. The confusion on their faces was a masterpiece of unspoken questions. My mother recovered first her hostess' smile, now strained to its breaking point. "You two know each other." "Know each other," Abernathy laughed, still holding my hands. "Patricia, this young woman is the secret to my entire collection. She's the expert I was telling you about. The one with the infallible I, C.P. Stands for Clara Pierce. We've been working together for years." He finally released my hands and turned to my parents. "You must be incredibly proud. A talent like hers is one in a generation." The silence that followed was so absolute, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My father looked at me, then back at Abernathy, then back at me again, as if trying to solve a complex equation that kept yielding an impossible answer. "Well," my mother said, forcing another brittle laugh, "we certainly are. But today is about our other daughter's talent. Victoria, darling, come and show Mr. Abernathy your work." Victoria rose from the sofa like a sleepwalker, her earlier confidence completely gone. She led him to the far wall where 5 of her large abstract canvases were dramatically lit. They were technically proficient, full of bold colors and aggressive brushstrokes. They were also utterly soulless. Abernathy stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back. He was silent for a full minute, studying each one. My family held its breath. I could feel their desperate hope radiating across the room. Finally, he turned his expression carefully neutral. "Your use of color is energetic, my dear." "Thank you," Victoria whispered. But my father prompted, unable to stand the suspense. Abernathy looked at him, then back at the paintings. "But it's derivative," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I see echoes of Pollock a little, Richter, but I don't see you. There's a technical skill here, certainly, but there's no point of view. It's decorative. It lacks depth." Each word was a precise surgical cut. He wasn't being cruel. He was being an expert. He was giving an honest appraisal. And that honesty was more devastating than any insult could ever be. Victoria's face crumpled. She looked like a child who had just been told that Santa Claus wasn't real. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a small, horrified gasp escaping. My father just stared his last desperate hope, turning to ash before his eyes. And as I watched their world crumble, I finally understood. I understood the fragile architecture of their lives and why it was collapsing so completely. There is a profound difference between having and being. My family had built their entire identity on having. Having a respectable gallery, having social status, having a beautiful home, having a supposedly talented daughter. It was all a performance, a collection of external things they used to define themselves. Their sense of self was a costume they rented with money. They didn't have propped up by a reputation they hadn't earned. I, on the other hand, had spent my life quietly focused on being knowledgeable, being competent, being trustworthy, being good at what I do. My value wasn't in a house or a title. It was in my mind, in my expertise. It was something internal, something I had earned, something that no one could take away from me. That's the illusion of power from an empty wallet. My family wielded the appearance of power, but it was hollow. It was dependent on others believing their performance. The moment an expert like Abernathy walked in and refused to play along, the illusion shattered. Because when your entire worth is based on what you have, the moment you have nothing, you are nothing. Their wallets were empty, both financially and in terms of genuine substance, and their power simply evaporated. Abernathy, clearly sensing the profound discomfort in the room, turned back to me. "Clara," he said, his tone shifting back to business, "forgive the intrusion. Perhaps we can discuss the details of that Monet consignment later this week. My office will be in touch." "Of course, James," I replied. He gave a final polite nod to my stunned family. "Thank you for the viewing." And with that he was gone, the quiet click of the front door closing behind him like a final curtain falling on their pathetic play. For a long moment, after the door clicked shut behind James Abernathy, the only sound in the room was the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock. It felt like it was counting down the final seconds of their lives as they knew them. My mother was the first to move. She sank onto the sofa, her hand still covering her mouth, her eyes wide and blank with shock. My father hadn't moved. He stood like a statue, his face a mottled, unhealthy red. Victoria was staring at her paintings on the wall, but her expression was one I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or defiance. It was a hollow, dawning horror. The look of someone who had just been told their entire religion was a lie. I picked up my purse from the secretary desk. "Well," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the suffocating silence, "I should be going. I have a lot of unpacking to do." My mother's head snapped toward me. You knew," she whispered. "You knew who he was." "I knew he was a serious collector," I replied, not giving her everything. "Which is why I was surprised you'd risk showing him Victoria's work without a professional appraisal first." I let the words hang there, a final, small twist of the knife. I had been their professional appraisal right here all along, and they had never thought to ask. I walked out of the room, down the familiar hallway, and out the front door into the humid Savannah air. I didn't look back. As I crossed the street, I could feel their eyes on me through the window, but I didn't turn. The past was behind me now. My future was waiting right in front of me. From the bay window of my new home office, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of their house. I watched them over the next few weeks, not out of malice, but with a kind of detached, anthropological curiosity. I was watching a carefully constructed ecosystem collapse in real time. The first tremor came a week later. I heard about it from my brother Kenneth, who had called me for the first time in years. His voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "The bank called about the gallery," he said. "That $350,000 loan. They were counting on the Abernathy sale to make the next payment. They don't have it." I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I was in a distant sort of way. Sorry for him caught in the middle of it all. "Are you?" he asked, a hint of his old resentment in his tone. "I'm sorry you have to deal with it," I clarified. "But I'm not sorry they have to face the consequences of their choices." 2 weeks after that, the for sale sign went up in front of the gallery. It wasn't the dignified planned sale of a retiring owner. It was a bank-ordered liquidation. The sign was a public declaration of failure, right there on the main street of the arts district. Their social standing, the very thing they had sacrificed my well-being to protect, evaporated overnight. The second larger earthquake hit a month later. The house. The second mortgage they had been trying to get, probably to cover the gallery's debts, was denied. Without the gallery's supposed income, they were a bad risk. Then the foreclosure notices started arriving. I saw the certified letters left on their doorstep. I saw my father snatch them up his shoulders, slumping a little lower each time. But the most devastating collapse wasn't financial. It was Victoria's. Her entire identity, her entire sense of self-worth had been built on the fragile scaffolding of her talent. James Abernathy hadn't just criticized her paintings. He had bulldozed the entire structure. Kenneth told me she hadn't painted a single stroke since that day. She spent most of her time in her room, the door locked. The grand studio they had planned to build for her in my old room was never mentioned again. She was a star whose sun had been extinguished, and she didn't know how to exist in the dark. She had believed their hype, and the silence now was deafening. My parents' fall was quieter, but just as complete. They lost their friends. The people who had flocked to their dinner parties, who had praised Victoria's genius, they all disappeared now that the money and the status were gone. Their world had been a performance, and without a stage, the audience had simply gone home. I watched from my window as the moving truck pulled up to their house on a gray Tuesday morning. It wasn't a large truck. They weren't moving to another beautiful home. They were downsizing, forced into a small rental apartment on the other side of town. I saw them carrying out boxes, their movements slow and defeated. My father, who had always stood so tall, seemed stooped shrunken. My mother, who had always been so perfectly put together, looked frayed her hair out of place for the first time I could remember. I could have stepped in. At any point. I had the money. I could have paid off the gallery's loan, settled the mortgage, saved them from this public humiliation. The thought occurred to me more than once, a lingering echo of the dutiful daughter I used to be. But I didn't. Because I finally understood that forgiveness doesn't mean rescuing people from the consequences of their own choices. It doesn't mean rebuilding the walls of the prison they built for you. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for them and for yourself is to let the walls fall, to let the truth clear the way for whatever comes next, even if it's just ruins. As they loaded the last box into their car, my mother looked up and saw me standing in my window across the street. Our eyes met for a long moment. There was no anger in her expression anymore, just a vast, empty landscape of regret. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just held her gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the distance between us. Not just the distance of a street, but the distance of a lifetime of choices. Then I stepped back from the window and drew the blinds. The show was over. The house across the street remained dark. It had been 6 months since the moving trucks had pulled away, leaving behind an empty shell that whispered of a life that had imploded. I no longer watched it with any sense of victory. The anger, the hurt had all settled into a quiet, distant landscape, like a storm I had passed through, and could now see only in my rearview mirror. My new home, the Abernathy estate, had slowly transformed. It was no longer just a statement. It was a sanctuary. My books filled the shelves of the office. My art collection, small but carefully chosen, adorned the walls and the scent of coffee. An old paper had replaced the musty smell of a house left empty. I had found a rhythm here, a peace I hadn't known was possible. I heard about their lives in small, filtered doses from Kenneth. He had become a regular visitor, showing up on my porch on Sunday afternoons, with his architecture textbooks, seeking a quiet place to study. He never asked for anything. He just seemed to crave the calm that now lived in my house. He told me the gallery was gone, sold for a fraction of its supposed worth to cover the debts. My parents had moved into a small apartment on the south side of town, a place my mother would have once described as unfortunate. He said she didn't leave the apartment much. My father had taken a job doing inventory for a shipping company, the irony of which was not lost on me. Victoria, he said, was the one who had taken it the hardest. Her artistic career had vanished overnight. Without the gallery to legitimize her and my father's money to fund her, she was just a woman with a hobby. She had apparently tried to get a job in marketing, but her resume, like her art, was full of style and lacking in substance. She blames you, Kenneth told me one afternoon, not looking up from his drafting table. I know, I said. It wasn't your fault, he added quietly. We all knew. We never said anything. That was the closest he had ever come to an apology, and it was more than I had gotten from anyone else. It was enough. Last week he'd brought over a letter he'd received. It was from the university, a rejection from their prestigious architecture program. His grades were good, but his portfolio was lacking, and he couldn't afford the tuition anyway. I watched him try to hide his disappointment, to put on the same brave, quiet face I had worn for years, and in him I saw a reflection of the child I had been, the one whose passions were deemed impractical, whose dreams were secondary. And that's when I knew what I had to do with the money, the $15,000. My inheritance, the money that had been the seed of so much pain, the root of the final devastating betrayal. It had been sitting in a separate account untouched, a tainted sum I couldn't bring myself to spend. It was a monument to their deceit, but it didn't have to be. That evening, I called my lawyer. I told her I wanted to set up a scholarship, an annual grant for a promising architecture student at the local university who demonstrated financial need. And what would you like to call the fund? She asked. I thought about naming it after my grandparents, the ones who had left me the money in the first place. I thought about naming it after myself, a final declaration of my success. But neither felt right. Legacy wasn't about claiming credit. It was about planting a seed in fertile ground and watching it grow. The Kenneth Scholarship Fund, I said. My lawyer was silent for a moment. After your brother. Yes, I said. After my brother. Because he was the only one who had tried in his own quiet way to cross the street. He was the one who deserved to have his name attached to something that built futures instead of tearing them down. After I hung up, I stood at my office window, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the difficult, painful journey of the last year, and I realized the most profound truth that had emerged from the rubble of my old life. Sometimes the family you are born into isn't the one you belong to. For years, I had tried to find a space for myself in a house where all the rooms were already taken. I had tried to earn a love that was never truly available. We think of blood as a bond, an unbreakable tie. But sometimes blood is just a shared history, a collection of memories that hold you hostage. The real family, the one that nurtures you, is the one you build. It's built from respect, from shared values, from people who see you and celebrate you, not because they have to, but because they want to. Letting go of my blood family had been the hardest, most painful decision of my life. It felt like an amputation. But in that empty space, something new had room to grow, a chosen family, a life built on my own terms, a quiet sense of self that didn't need their approval to be real. To let go of a toxic bloodline isn't an act of betrayal, it's an act of self-preservation. It's choosing to find yourself, even if it means leaving them behind. My life now is quieter, but fuller. My house is a gathering place, not for strained family dinners, but for young artists from the local college who I've started mentoring. They come over for critiques, for advice, for a cup of coffee, and a conversation with someone who believes in them. This evening, 3 of them are gathered in my living room, their portfolios spread out on the floor. I see the same spark in their eyes I once had in mine. A young painter, a sculptor, a photographer. They are full of talent and doubt, and I do for them what no one ever did for me. I see them, I listen, I encourage. This line here, I say to the painter, pointing to a detail in her landscape. This is where your unique voice is starting to emerge. Lean into that. She looks up at me, her face glowing with a hope that is more valuable than any painting. And in this moment, surrounded by creativity and budding potential, I feel a sense of purpose that transcends money or status or a grand house on a historic street. My family wanted me to make myself smaller so Victoria could shine. But in the end, by choosing to step out of their shadow, I found a way to become a light for others. That was the real legacy. Not the money, not the house, but this. The quiet, profound joy of sowing seeds on fertile ground and knowing with absolute certainty that something beautiful is going to grow.